Welcome to Orioles on the Verge. This is Zach Spedden, joined as always by Bob Phelan and Nick Stevens, and we're coming to you with our top 50 prospects update for the 2025 season. And this is always one of our favorite shows to do every year as we reveal our top 50 prospects in the Orioles system for the coming year. And as usual, a lot of tough choices to be made on this list, and we will dive into those tonight on this episode of Orioles on the Verge, which is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting in 2025. Whether you're a seasoned fan or a first-time bettor, BetOnline is your ultimate game day companion. With the largest selection of odds on everything from NBA and college basketball to the NHL and UFC, BetOnline continues to be your number one sports betting source. From every three-pointer to hat trick, BetOnline has you covered with odds, stats, and more for every game, every play, and every win. BetOnline, the game starts here. We do our top 50 updates for the main episode or for the main podcast twice a year, once preseason and then once usually beginning of August, right after the draft. But if you're a member of our Patreon community, you get an update to this list monthly during the season. So if you haven't signed up yet, you should check that out. But as a refresher, or perhaps if you're new to the show, first of all, welcome. But if you're new to the show and you don't know how we put our list together, we follow the same formula every year, and I'll let Bob explain that.
Yeah, you'd think I've explained this enough times that I could concisely just list it off, but we each do our personal top 50 rankings, 1 to 50, and then I look at them, add the numbers up. First place gets 50 points, second place 49, all the way down to 50th place getting 1 point. Simple as just adding up the numbers and putting them in order. And yeah, for whatever reason, it works out. I always end up liking our cumulative list more than my own personal list. So that's a sign that I think we're doing things right.
We'll dive right in here with the top 10. And I'm going to start with the top two spots before we get into the rest of the top 10. Samuel Basallo is our number one prospect going into the 2025 season. He is followed by Kobe Mayo at number two. In these two players, you have consensus top 100 prospects who rank among the best prospects in the game. And in Basallo's case, arguably the best catching prospect in baseball right now. Both of them should begin this year in the high minors, though Mayo may stand a shot at cracking the opening day roster going into spring. Both have good hit tools with excellent raw power that is translating into game power. But in the end, we went with Basallo across the board as our number one prospect. And Nick, I'll start with you here. This is a really tough choice at the top. Why do you think we went with Basallo as opposed to Mayo in this case?
Yeah, I think kind of like what we talked about with our Patreon episode, it was the fact that this is no slide against Mayo. It has nothing to do with what he did at the major league level last year. That is the most important point here. But it was, when you look at the age, a level a prospect is at, and the production they're putting up, all of that's very important. And Basallo was 19 years old, 4.5 years younger than his peers in AA, was OPS in 820 with almost 40 extra base hits. And this is also, he's catching. This is a position where peak offensive output isn't typically until, late 20s. It's much later than every other offensive position. And here Basallo is raking at the AA level. He got to AAA, small sample size. Obviously, it was what it was, but he was a 19-year-old kid. So you see him in spring. He's already hitting the ball pretty hard the other night in a Sunday afternoon. That spring training game looked good behind the plate. Not catching experts, but as far as defensive goes, but he didn't stand out. So it's not something that I saw jump out on the screen. So I say that's a win. It's again, the age and what he's doing offensively. It's really tough to keep him behind Kobe Mayo here. But yeah, Mayo is still this prospect who, when you look at average exit velo, 9th percentile velo, chase rate, contact rates, and you break it down by pitch, break it down by quadrant within the strike zone. I mean, in a lot of areas, Kobe Mayo put up numbers in AAA that were well above league average in a number of those categories. So both phenomenal prospects, both I imagine should be on the major league roster by the end of the year. But yeah, Basallo being the top guy here, 19-year-old kid putting up those kind of numbers in the upper levels of the minor leagues. It's truly impressive.
Yeah, if any other time, I think Kobe Mayo is the number one prospect in this system. And I still think he's a little bit underrated nationally on some of these lists that I'm seeing pop up. But, I mean, he smacked the ball 113 miles per hour just yesterday. So, like, clearly he's a stud. He's young. I think he just turned 22. He's got the numbers, the exit velos, everything that you want to see. Like, he's as much of a guaranteed bat as you're going to find from a polished prospect who's on the verge of, becoming a regular major league player. Just fantastic prospect through any measure you can find. But to me, Samuel Basayo, man, I just think more and more. I think he's just a special. Getting choked up. No, special prospect who I think if we were to take, obviously the Orioles have had a fantastic run at the top of their list the past few years, ever since Elias took over and drafted Adley Rutschman #1. I think you could argue that Basayo now is the best prospect of any of them. Maybe slightly behind Gunnar Henderson, but it's hard for me to distinguish Gunnar Henderson, the prospect, and Gunnar Henderson, who one team hit the majors, like just took off to an MVP caliber talent. But to me, he's like right there. I think he's a better prospect than Adley was, even though he was an incredible prospect just from his age, production, rate of improvement. And yeah, I think when all is said and done, Basayo, I think they're gonna regret not putting him #1 prospect in baseball again for the Orioles, but that run had to come to an end eventually. It doesn't really matter, but I just think Basayo is like perfect prospect.
Let's dive down now into the rest of the top 10. And typically for us, when we put together our top 10s, we tend to have the same 10 players, but not necessarily in the same order. That was the case for the most part this year, with one notable exception, which we'll talk about in a few minutes when we get into the teens. But at number 3 behind Mayo, we have Enrique Bradfield Jr., followed by fellow center fielder Vance Honeycutt, right-hander Chase McDermott, checks in at 5th. Then another center fielder, Judd Fabian, comes in at number 6, followed by outfielder Dylan Beavers. Right-handed pitcher Michael Ferret, one of the fastest risers in the system in 2024, has jumped all the way in to the top 10 at number 8. Brandon Young follows him at number 9. And rounding out the trio of right-handed pitchers at the bottom of our top 10 is Nestor Herman, who has been getting a ton of love nationally this offseason and gets a good nod from us here. Now, let's start with this number 3 spot, because we did have a little bit of a split here. Bob and I had Enrique Bradfield Jr. here, while Nick had Vance Honeycutt. And there's an argument for both. Bradfield, on one hand, has 2 80-grade tools, and really, outside of questions about how his power is going to develop, no real glaring flaws to his game. There's just a question of how good that bat is going to be and whether or not it's going to be good enough for him to be an impact everyday player at the major league level. Honeycutt seemingly has the louder tools of the two, arguably the better athlete, arguably the more high ceiling prospect, but huge question marks surrounding his hit tool right now. So, Nick, I'll start with you here. I know that for all three of us, this was probably a tough choice. What made you decide to go with Honeycutt 3rd as opposed to Bradfield?
For me, it was just ceiling, just because I kind of like to. I don't have mine labeled there, but I mean, I could pull up my individual list and kind of break down the different buckets of different tiers that I have. And it's not a perfect science yet, but within each tier, I then rank based on, or typically, it's not thorough throughout the entire list, but typically within that bucket, I'll put, all right, who do I think has the higher ceiling within that bucket, and that's how I continue to rank the guys within that tier there. And for me, it was just Honeycutt has the higher ceiling because like he also has 60, 70 grade speed, fielding. This is Gold Glove caliber defender as well, a guy who was in the conversation to be the 1-1 draft pick last year before his season. We know the questions are the hit tool, and if the Orioles can get anything out of that hit tool, then Vance Honeycutt, I don't think Vance Honeycutt gets the respect that he deserves as a prospect because of the massive questions about the strikeouts. And then obviously he came up in 15 games or something between Delmarva and Aberdeen last year, right after being drafted. Orioles didn't have a chance to, really get their hands on him and start the development process there. And a lot of the issues you saw in college, you saw at an exaggerated level in the pros. Obviously, he's facing the toughest competition he's ever faced in his life, coming off a full college season. So I'm going to wait and see what the Orioles can do with Vance Honeycutt next year, starting the year in Aberdeen. Let's see how high he can climb. Let's see how good the bat looks after the Orioles had a full offseason, full spring working with him. This is a guy who's, I think the potential is kind of off the charts. And Bradfield, we know what type of prospect he is. Like, there's not going to be any power, but he could impact a Major League Baseball game tomorrow if the regular season was here. And it's premier fielding, it's premier speed, even though he did get picked off on the other day. But spring training, he's just getting the legs warmed up. Yeah, that was the only differentiator for me. I think both of these guys' ceilings are all-star, Gold Glove caliber center fielders in the major leagues. But if Honeycutt can start connecting with that hit tool, the swing and miss is very real. But if he starts connecting, this is a guy who's going to look like the guy who should have gone 1-1 in the 2024 draft.
Yeah, I think that's a great case to have Honeycutt above Bradfield. For me, it's more like didn't get to see much of Honeycutt. I don't really fault the results of the post-draft performance, but I'm going to give someone a soft landing and then can always go up from there. I'd rather go up, and I've learned this from the international signing period over the past 5 or so years, where initially it's like, wow, Samuel Basayo, that one turned out to be the right call, put him up higher on the list. But I'm having trouble. Michael Hernandez, like I would put him like in the teens or 20s when he first signed, and it's like, man, the ceiling here is huge, but then it's like haven't seen him play, results aren't there. It's harder for me to move someone down than
we had no idea what to do with those international guys.
That is so true. That is so true.
We didn't know what those were.
So yeah, exactly. So I've kind of taken that into consideration with a guy like Honeycutt, who, yeah, he has a monster ceiling, but just wanted to, give a little more credit to the guys who are already in the system and doing it before I can easily move Honeycutt up the rankings if he comes in this season and starts balling out. So, yeah, I put Bradfield above just because I think he's got obviously a lower ceiling, but honestly, the floors aren't that much different. But I just like the fact that Bradfield can control the zone more. He's not going to swing and miss the way that Honeycutt potentially could down the line. He's going to get on base, whether it's bunt base hit, taking a walk, stealing. I just think it's a little more safe. And I don't like going safe, but in Bradfield's case, I just think he's a guaranteed major leaguer, guaranteed everyday player almost. So, yeah, I went with him, gave him the nod.
Yeah, and it was a similar thought process for me in putting Bradfield above Honeycutt. I do think that Honeycutt has the higher ceiling, and it's possible that by July of this year, we feel differently when we compare those two prospects. But I just feel like everything with Bradfield's game right now is a lot more refined, and that if we start to see more line drive power, not necessarily home run power, more line drive power from him at Bowie this year, then you can start talking about, okay, can he get to Norfolk in the second half? And if he goes there and he plays well, could he be on the major league roster as an everyday player at some point in 2026? The path that I envision for Honeycutt this year, and it's easy to see this because we've seen it with so many prospects, I picture slow start at Aberdeen, heats up around Memorial Day, goes on a tear for a month, gets promoted, and then has a strong finish in Bowie. That's kind of what I see coming for Honeycutt this year because we've seen that with several players in the last few years, but I could be wrong. Either way, I think that the Orioles have two good prospects here. And I'll dive in now to the rest of the top 10. Heavy on pitchers. The remaining spots here, you have 4 right-handed pitchers in that group. Then you have Fabian and Beavers, who are kind of at similar points. Both figure to start this year in AAA and what are pivotal seasons for their development because both are Rule 5 eligible at the end of the year. And it's easy to imagine right now the Orioles will have room for at least one of them. But the question is going to be there, I think, up until the trade deadline of, is there room for both? And if not, is one of them eventually traded? And I can go back and forth on which player I think could command more value in a trade or which one the Orioles were more likely to trade. But let's kind of talk about them as prospects because they're very different outfielders with different profiles. And yet it feels like there's kind of, I don't want to say boom or bust, but maybe a little bit of a gap between the ceiling and the floor for these guys.
Yeah, I had Beavers higher than Fabian here. I had Beavers 6 there, Judd Fabian 8 there. Fabian is just like, we know what that ceiling is. He's also Gold Glove caliber center fielder. Orioles have a lot of those. This, speed. He's not like electric speed, but he's going to be a threat on the base paths. He might be 10 to 15 stolen bases this season, but pitchers are going to have to stay conscious when Judd Fabian gets on base. The issue is Judd Fabian getting on base though, because that swing and miss is just massive. Like a 32% strikeout rate, 16% swinging strikeout rate when he was in AAA. I think that was combined AAA and AA last year, but it's a lot. Can he improve that this year? Sure, he can, but it's just that really scares me. And with Beavers, the reason why I have Beavers higher is because I think he has a better hit tool. I think there is power in there. It's like they're tinkering so much with him. They did this massive overhaul, and it's like they fixed something over here and something over here broke. And then they fix that, and then something else breaks. And it's just like they're fixing all these bits and pieces with Beavers, and now it's a matter of putting it all together for him. And I think he's going to have a full year in AAA to start putting it all together. And if he does, this is a guy who is 15 or so home runs a year. He doesn't have the power, I don't think, that Fabian does, but 15 or so home runs a year. He's going to hit for a decent average. He's going to get on base. He's added stolen bases to his weapon, his tool belt. Like, he really wasn't a stolen base threat in college or early on in his pro career. He was like 31 for like 34 or 35 last year in AA. So he's added that to his repertoire. I like Dylan Beavers and what he could potentially bring. With Fabian, for me, it's just, yeah, he could also be, maybe his floor is a little bit higher because you could put him in the major leagues and go play his center field defense as defensive replacement. Home run or bust is late in the game. Left-hander reliever comes in, you put Judd Fabian at the plate, probably a good chance he could get a home run. It's either going to be a home run or strikeout, but you get a home run, you win the game. So he could be in the big leagues pretty soon this year. Not pretty soon this year, but at some point this year as well. I just think overall, the full package, I like Beavers a little bit better.
Yeah, it's interesting. I do like, and Beavers has had a great start to spring too. First couple games he's gotten in, and he's made an impact. So I just think, again, I like the safety of the floor of Fabian. Like, guaranteed, he's a fourth, maybe fifth outfielder in the majors for as long as he's cheap at the bare minimum, just because he can play the great defense. He's got a good arm, can run a little bit, has the pop. Like you said, if you're facing a lefty, of course you want to go after him because he might swing and actually make contact and send the ball flying a long way. But for me, I think that safety there is a little bit more valuable at this point in the list. But Beavers certainly, as shout out to Vivek in the Discord, who likes to say Kyle Tucker light. I would say maybe very light, but yeah, I think the upside is more realistic for Beavers. Like Fabian, yeah, you can dream on, if he could make more contact, this could happen, but you gotta do that first, and that's a hard tool to improve. That's probably the hardest thing to improve, as much as the Orioles love to try. But Beavers, like, the pieces are all there. He's just got to put them together. And, he's more of a tinkerer. He's more of a project, as we've said since the day he was drafted. But if it all clicks, yeah, he might be a Kyle Tucker light type of guy. So I like them both, as much as everyone's always trying to trade Dylan Beavers, myself included. Like, it might turn out that he doesn't get traded and he ends up being a very valuable player for this team down the line. I could easily see a scenario where Orioles need a top of the rotation starter. Hey, Sandy Alcantara, by the way, looking pretty good coming back from surgery. He's got a nice contract for the next 3 years or so. Maybe Heston Kjerstad gets dealt in a trade for Sandy at some point, and Dylan Beavers starts putting it all together AAA, and there you go. He could be the guy that is at least a platoon partner in right field. So yeah, I gave the slight nod to Fabian, but it's really neck and neck, and I could see it flipping multiple times during the course of the season coming up.
Yeah, it's a really close call, and I'll say this with Fabian's swing and miss issues. I don't see them going anywhere. This is who he is. He's been this kind of player since his college days. It's a matter of whether or not you can get it down to a level that's acceptable for him to be at least a viable fourth outfielder in the major leagues. And I brought this up, and it's loosely used the term comp here because I don't really see them as the exact same type of player. But could Judd Fabian have a Jake Marisnick type career? Marisnick, never hit enough to be an everyday player necessarily, but he was still a good fourth outfielder for a lot of good teams for a long stretch there. And he had a little bit of everything. He had a little bit of power, had a little bit of speed, good defensive outfielder. I could see Fabian kind of going into that bucket. Worst case, maybe that's one of the worst case scenarios. The worst case scenario is that he just stops hitting in AAA and can't ever crack that level. But there's probably a middle ground where he's not the high ceiling everyday player, but also isn't stuck at AAA for the rest of his career. And I kind of see Marisnick as a comp there. And I'll move on to the pitchers before we go to the teens range on this list. We have McDermott above the rest of this group, but I have to say that Ferret, Young, and Herman, all for different reasons, have really boosted their stocks in the last year. And I said on our Patreon countdown that I think Ferret could be the top pitching prospect in the system this time next year. But Herman is right there, and McDermott and Young, though they should graduate this year, both come to 2025 with really strong profiles.
I gotta say, 2 innings of Brandon Young pitching this spring training has me like already wanting to nudge him up this list, maybe above Chase McDermott, just because McDermott hasn't pitched probably. But I just absolutely loved everything that we saw from Brandon Young in that game on Sunday against the Phillies. He got in early enough that he was facing starters still. He was sitting in the mid 90s. You can see the hop. You can see the 20 inches or so of inverted break, induced vertical break. And yeah, I think he figured out a way to keep that hop on the major league ball, or at least get the hop at least trending back towards what he did with the minor league ball with the major league ball, because man, his fastball looked great, got a tons of swings and misses, and he just really looked poised, commanded everything. Just was super impressed by Brandon Young on Sunday. But yeah, Michael Ferret, Nestor Herman, these guys could easily be top 5 prospects fighting out for best pitching prospect in the system by the end of the season, as well as some guys we'll talk about in the next grouping. But yeah, I love the year of the pitcher redux, year of the pitcher part 2, what have you. Year of the pitcher continues in 2025.
Yeah, Young is actually like 19 inches of induced vertical break yesterday, so he definitely did. And if he can hold that velo like that, that is going to be huge. I think everything else looked pretty much on par for what he did last year in AAA. But if he's adding the fastball velo to that as well, hopefully this isn't Cole Irvin 2.0 situation where the velo disappears. First spring training game on the 40-man roster, a little pumped up, but no, this guy who had 2 Tommy John surgeries and needed some time. Like, he did a lot last year. So by the time he got to AAA, I mean, the guy was pitching. I think he eclipsed over 100 innings last year. Like, arm's probably tired. He hasn't pitched very much in his career. If you look back at Brandon Young's full minor league career since he got picked up in after the 2020 draft, there's not a ton of mileage on that arm. So I'm not shocked at all to see the increased velo. Ferret, yeah, for me, I think I had Ferret the highest among this next tier of pitchers behind Chase McDermott, just because, again, go back to the ceiling. I think Ferret has an incredible pitch mix, and everything he did, he added like 15 pounds or so last offseason, completely revamped the repertoire, added, kick change, added a death ball, all the new fancy pitches, added the velo to his fastball. Kind of scared me. This skinny JUCO kid adding like 4 miles per hour to his fastball scared the crap out of me last year, but he held up strong and had a 28, 29% strikeout rate across 2 levels of the minor leagues. We haven't even gotten to, I think, the The next tier is going to have the big cluster of starting pitching prospects here, but I think those three guys, Ferret, Young, and Herman in particular, are this is going to be a huge year for all three of those guys.
Yeah, let's jump down now to the next part of the list. And as Nick touched on, there's a lot of interesting pitching prospects in this list, but you also have some position players that I think make this section particularly fun to follow. Number 11, Keeler Morphe, another right-handed pitcher who was a fast riser in 2024. He is followed by Pat Riley. Riley, who was acquired from the Pirates at the trade deadline, impressed at Double-A Bowie last year as a starter and seems to have made considerable gains since his college days at Vanderbilt. Behind them, left-hander Luis De Leon checks in at number 13. De Leon had some command issues in the second half at Aberdeen last year, but still possesses electric stuff from the left side. Griff O'Farrell, shortstop in the Orioles' second pick in their 2024 draft class, comes in at number 14. He did get top 10 consideration from Nick and myself. Trey Gibson follows him at 15. And then we have another right-handed pitcher in Cameron Weston at 16, followed by Aaron Estrada at 17. Estrada coming off a nice season between the two A-ball levels in which he played multiple positions on the diamond and showcased some interesting power we did not necessarily see coming. Creed Willems, speaking of power, number 18, hard-hitting catcher from the left side. He is followed by Leandro Arias, a young, athletic middle infielder who seems to be putting all the tools together. And then at number 20, Trace Bright, who had his fair share of ups and downs at Bowie last year, but for the most part is holding steady in our rankings and still has one of the more interesting pitch mixes in the whole farm system. Now, I think this big storyline here is the pitching. From Morphe down to Bright, there are a lot of really intriguing arms in this group. And some guys that not only were high on, but they're starting to get some attention nationally, like Morphe, Gibson, and Weston. And you put it together, and I think there's some guys in here that could easily be comfortably inside the top 10 next year.
I think Keeler Morphe has a chance to be the number one prospect in the system this time next year. I'm so excited to see his development and how it goes in 2025. Obviously, wide range of outcomes possible. He might, creep up the list instead of sprint up the list as he sprinted up it to get to this point, at least. But very excited about him. I think Riley is like a guy that has an amazing fastball, and if he could just unlock a little extra command, a new pitch, he's another guy that could take a leap. Every single person on this section of the list, I feel like, has a case to, like you said, they could easily be top 10, if not higher, at this time next year. Trey Gibson, I love this section of the list. I think the deeper you go on this top 50 list this year, the more exciting it gets. So that's, you might say that the Orioles are falling off a little bit when it comes to, national top prospects as an organization list. We might be a little bit lower down, but I just think the depth in the breakout candidates have never been higher. Between the international side of things really getting going and drafting some high school players, and just, it's a very exciting time. Part of the list, the next 10 to 20 to 30 names we're about to talk about.
I think just with the pitchers in this section of the list, like I have Morphe the highest just because, again, ceiling. When you completely skip the FCL, you're throwing 100 miles per hour. This is an extremely athletic kid. We don't have extension numbers or anything, but even though he's 5'8", I bet he's got some massive extension. I bet the fastball data is unbelievable with Morphe. I would love to get my hands on that information, but he already has 3 really good offerings, and he's supposedly adding a 4th pitch for this year. So I'm pumped to watch Morphe. And there are a lot of these guys here. Riley, he's got a bullpen floor. When you got that type of fastball, even if the walks don't improve a tremendous amount, it's a guy that could still work out of a major league bullpen. And we'll see what he does in his first full year at the Orioles system. But even someone like Luis De Leon, I know there's a lot of hype 2 years ago, and last year he kind of remained a little stagnant, but this is still a guy who signed for $30,000. He's a lefty, he throws at 97 miles per hour. And I think I saw someone else, it was a fantasy analyst, I think, and he kind of said, there's still a little bit of ceiling there with De Leon, But even if he doesn't work out as a starter, this is a guy who's going to make hitters' lives hell out of a bullpen at the major league level. And I agree with that assessment. I think between his fastball slider combo, but same with De Leon, and then you've got Cameron Weston, funky delivery, 4 or 5 pitches, huge ground ball numbers. Who else was on that list there? Trace Bright. This is a guy who's throwing in the mid 90s with a 3,000 RPM curveball. All of these guys are like solid major league relief floors. I'm interested to see who takes that next step and who emerges as like, oh, they're a rotation candidate next year. Because you've got some guys, maybe not Morphe. He's not going to be a major league rotation candidate next year, but Gibson, Herman, Weston, Riley, De Leon, all these guys, Bright, they're reaching the upper levels of the minor leagues. I'm excited to see who takes the big jump forward next year. But you've got a bunch of guys who I think are going to get some looks in the big leagues out of the bullpen.
Yeah, and I gotta say, Cameron Weston, man, I think he's probably the most underrated of the pitchers in this grouping, just because, and I like that he's a little bit different than the rest of the guys, right? He's got that funky delivery you talked about. It's just a different angle. He's doing a different thing. And I like that it's not just like every pitcher that's coming up through the Orioles has to pitch like this. Like, I like that they're leaning into his strengths. And I just think he's going to be the guy that makes his major league debut this year at some point. And I have a good feeling he's going to end up like the Brandon Young of this year, where by the end of the year, it's like, man, what a pitcher we have on our hands that we weren't necessarily counting on. But just want to shout him out because I always feel like kind of glazed over him a little bit, and he deserves the spotlight.
Yeah, I really like everyone in this group of pitchers. I had a chance to see Morphe throw in person last year, and he is still pretty raw at this point. I think the command of the slider, especially, is an area where he stands to improve. But the fastball, he's able to pump it up into the high 90s consistently. He pairs that with a really good changeup. Riley, I thought, made tremendous strides last year. And one thing I want to point out about him is that he pitched the season in 2 very hitter-friendly environments, starting with Greensboro in the Pirates system, and then in Bowie once he got to the Orioles system. And for a guy that can work the fastball up in the zone as well as he does, he didn't necessarily have the home run issues you would expect to see from a guy pitching in those kind of ballparks. So that was good for him. He also generates pretty decent ground ball numbers. I will dive in here, and I like Gibson and Weston a lot for the reasons that you guys both touched on. I had De Leon a little bit higher than you guys did on the list, and it was a tough decision when I got into that cluster of De Leon, Herman, Riley, Morphe, Portes, who ultimately fell outside of the teens. The reason I went with De Leon there is that the stuff he has is not something you see from the left side very often. A fastball that he can get into the upper 90s consistently, and the changeup. There are a couple of theories that I have about the command issues that he had at Aberdeen. One, they were mostly to be expected, but I think the degree of walk issues, what I noticed in his outings was he would come out of the bullpen where I don't think he was as effective as he had been as a starter. And he could put together a good inning, maybe 2 good innings. Then all of a sudden, the third time through the order, he would just go out and he'd have an inning where he couldn't find a strike zone. Sometimes he'd come back out and find his command again. Sometimes the outing would end there. And that really put a dent in his Aberdeen numbers. But if he's able to find the consistency he had in the first half of Delmarva last year, I could see him in Bowie by July.
I just want to quickly shout out Trey Gibson a little more as well, just because, I mean, his first full year as a pro last year, 2 levels, a 30% strikeout rate, a 2.99 FIP across 92 innings, also a 59% ground ball rate. So he, one of the top strikeout arms in the system. When hitters do make contact, they kept it on the ground. He's averaging 95 miles per hour. He touches 99 now. Slider and curveball both had whiff rates north of 40%. He gets more than 7 feet of extension. That's Grayson Rodriguez level. Trey Gibson's a freaking monster. And I am pretty stoked among this group. Like we could sit here and yeah, we've all made the case for all these different arms in this range and what makes him so attractive. Gibson's yet another one. And the Orioles gave him probably what, maybe $5,000 and said, "Hey, please sign with us after the draft." This is a fantastic group of low cost, undrafted free agents, low cost international free agents, back into the draft picks. And these are all some of the top pitching prospects in this organization. Guys who are all getting national love and all guys who I think Morphe, Young, Gibson, Herman, these guys are flirting with top 100 overall as well. So true testament to the pitching development here.
Yeah, I love the ground ball rates from Gibson, who the Orioles deserve so much credit. They signed this guy undrafted after he hadn't pitched for a season. We've been through the reasons why he probably didn't pitch for Liberty that season, but just so much credit to find him and just stay on top of that. Like you're working on another level. And Chris Respitar, who kind of shouted him out this time last year, was right on top of it. And then we saw him pitch and we were like, yeah, this guy's legit. Same with Luis De Leon. Like he's never had a ground ball rate under 59.1%. And that was at high A last year. Other than that, he's 60% or more. He had a 73.4% ground ball rate in low A in 2023. Like these heavy fastballs. Love to see it. You get the strikeouts and you can keep the ball on the ground. With the defense the Orioles are going to be putting up at the major league level, this is like a recipe for success, no doubt about it.
I want to talk about Griff O'Farrell for a moment because although I haven't gone into the individual list this far to know this for sure, I have to imagine this was where we split the most on a single player, or at least one of the largest splits. Nick and I both had O'Farrell inside of our top 10s. Nick had him at number 9. I had him at 10. Bob, on the other hand, had him all the way down at 25 on his list, below some players like Austin O'Verne, Ethan Anderson, Zach Fruit, among others who did not crack the teens. And Bob, I'll start with you here. I know that with O'Farrell, our reaction to that pick on draft day was lukewarm, to put it one way. What have you seen from O'Farrell or not seen from O'Farrell that maybe really hasn't moved the needle for you much since then?
Yeah, I mean, solid player, solid prospect for sure. Can field a little bit, can certainly hit. Probably maybe the best hit tool not named Samuel Basayo in the system, but it's not really impacting the ball. Like just comparing him to Joey Ortiz, like it took Joey Ortiz putting on some serious strength and muscle and impacting the ball to really get him moving up the rankings and becoming one of my favorite players. I don't think he's as good of a fielder as Joey Ortiz. I don't think he's gonna hit extra bases, impact the ball the way Joey Ortiz does. But having him 25th, I mean, that's not bad. I still think he's a top 30 prospect in the system. I'm just not seeing the top 10, top 15 type of stuff. To me, I mean, he could certainly get there. He could certainly improve his game in ways to get him there for me. But for me, I think great hitter. He showed it immediately after the draft. But let's see that continue up the ladder. I mean, of course, he's going to perform well for me in low A, even high A out of the draft when he was, at Virginia. And I don't know. I just don't see the upside. This is a safe. He's like the Ryan McKenna of the infield for me. I don't know. Take that as an insult or take it as a compliment. It could go either way. But yeah, I'm just not as high on him. I know I'm definitely like the low man when it comes to all the lists that I've seen, but hopefully I'm wrong.
I want to talk about Aaron Estrada real quick, just because flip this around and talk about upside here. You look at some of the international middle infielders from recent draft classes, not including the most recent, the last two, but some of Elias and Kobe Prez's early international signing classes. I think Estrada emerged from 2024 as the guy with the highest ceiling. Leandro Arias and some of these other guys, they got some pretty solid floors, but Aaron Estrada, he's listed at 5'8", and he added power to his game last year that he did not show those first couple of years. And when he got to high A, the strikeout rate went down, the walks went up, small sample size, but this is a 19-year-old kid who was walking more, striking out less, and also had a contact rate the highest of his career up to this point. It's like 80%. So I think Aaron Estrada is among this group, among the fielders in this group. You might want to get to Aberdeen and see what he can do there, because if he's going to continue to add power and make contact at the rate that he does, I don't know what he can do defensively. I haven't sat and watched him play defensively, but that bat, there is a lot. He's working with a lot in that 5'8" frame there.
Yeah, completely agree. Love Estrada. I think maybe he could even be a guy that plays center field a little bit. Like he could definitely transition to the outfield, or he could be like our version of Jose Altuve, little guy with some pop and switch hitter. I think, yeah, like you said, he hit for average right away. Like he's a performer. He doesn't strike out much. And then he's adding power, especially like we talked about at Delmarva from the left-hand side, just hitting it out that way is very hard to do. And he did that a few times. And yeah, like certainly already a breakout to get where he is. But I think there's definitely some more room there. Like if he gets to Bowie this year in that hitting environment, I feel like he could do some damage at a really young age. So yeah, I love Aaron Estrada, no doubt about it.
I'll jump down now to the next section of the list, 21 through 30. And this is a part of the list where you have some players that have been in the system for a while, pitchers in particular, that at the very least are holding steady with their rankings. And then a few hitters who are recent additions to the system, either through the draft or international free agency, that could take steps forward in 2025. That group starts off with Ethan Anderson, and a pick out of the University of Virginia, a catcher who could also play a little bit of first base and outfield, showed a lot of promise with the bat after the draft last summer. He is followed by Edgar Portes at number 22. Portes has really refined his pitch mix over the last 2 years to emerge as a solid starting pitching candidate in the Orioles farm system, despite not having premium velocity from the right side. He is followed by Jordan Sanchez at number 23. And if you're looking for an outfielder with tons of raw power and a lot of potential in the hit tool, Sanchez is your prospect. Although right now it looks like he may begin this season in the FCL. It would not be surprising if we see a lot of him in Delmarva over the summer. He is followed by Austin O'Verne at number 24, a center fielder picked out of USC in last year's draft, who started to make some strides with the hit tool in the Cape Cod League. And then when he got into the Orioles system, and comes into this year as one of the more interesting prospects in the organization. Thomas Sosa follows him at 25. And again, much like with Jordan Sanchez, a lot of loud tools, but plenty of question marks at this point. Alex Pham at number 26. Pham got off to a slow start in 2024, but rebounded to put up some of the better numbers among Orioles pitchers in the minor leagues last year. He figures to start this season at AAA. Steven Martinez at 27, a young outfielder with a lot of potential from the international class. Zach Fruit at 28, a pitcher with a good fastball and an interesting pitch mix, who has come a long way with his stuff in the last couple of years. Number 29, Frederick Bencosme. Now, on the surface, this is a pretty steep drop for Bencosme, who has typically been in the teens on our list in the last few years. And while his season at Bowie produced mixed results last year, there's still a lot of things to like about this young player. And then just behind him at number 30, Elvin Garcia, a young shortstop who already shows good acumen at the position and a developing bat. Again, another young international player. So this is a really interesting mix because you have some established arms mixed in with college bats and some younger recent international signees, as in from the last year or two. So just overall, what are your guys' thoughts on this section?
This is where I want to get into the other big theme of this list and this year for Orioles prospects, for me at least, is the year that the international scene just takes off for the Orioles and announces like, we're here, we're not going anywhere, it's just going to get better. I think between Jordan Sanchez, Thomas Sosa, Steven Martinez, one of those three guys at least is going to be in the top 10 by the end of the year on this list. And one of them might even be like borderline top 100 overall prospect. in baseball type of talent by the end of the year if they break out the right way. My pick right now is Thomas Sosa. I think he's just adding more and more power. It looks like in the offseason, like just putting on good weight, and yeah, I think he could be a big slugger. Steve Martinez, and even other guys that aren't even showing up here yet, a little bit lower on the list. Elvin Garcia, again, another guy that could just in a year or two be like an elite prospect for us. And yeah, Ben Cosme, he dropped 17 spots from the last time he was on an official list. But for me, like, this is our big update. Like, it's a whole different configuration than the in-season updates where we're kind of just tinkering. This is like, okay, now we're really looking at all the results from last year, projecting ahead. And yeah, again, kind of similar to Griff or Farrell for me, where yeah, he's going to play some defense. He's got a good hit tool. Put on a little more muscle, impact the ball would help him a lot. But solid prospect, utility type of guy is what I see from him. So not a knock whatsoever to me where he's ended up on this list. And yeah, again, just exciting. Austin O'Verne could be another breakout candidate this year. A lot of fun on this part of the list, like I was saying earlier.
Yeah, I think when you look at some of the international players here, I'm anxious to see just how high some of these guys climb. Just because Jordan Sanchez, yeah, he's a little bit older in the DSL, but he had a 166 WRC plus, a 15% walk rate, 20% strikeout rate, solid numbers there. He's max EV of 108 miles per hour last year. So I think he spends a big chunk of the year in Delmarva, and we can see just how much power is there. And then you look at Steven Martinez. I mean, Steven Martinez, I think might be criminally underrated, but again, I agree as far as the top of the list there, I'm more aggressive with the ceiling type stuff. That's why I like to put guys like Vance Honeycutt a little bit higher. But with the international players, I'm much more conservative on that front. Like let's pump the brakes a little bit until we get more data, until we get our eyes on them. We have a Dominican Summer League feed, which is why last year we got so aggressive on Keeler Morphe and Esteban Mejia, because we could watch those guys. We had data. We don't on some of these younger guys just yet, but Steven Martinez was a 17-year-old child putting up massive exit velos, and he's 6'4", had a 137 WRC plus, and had 4 home runs already as a 16-year-old in the Dominican Summer League. I think Steven Martinez, it could be I think I've said this before during the offseason, Steven Martinez is potentially a top 10 prospect in the system by the end of the year. And then Elvin Garcia, you got two guys, Elvin Garcia and Emilio Sanchez. I don't think we're up to Sanchez yet. I think he's 31 there. Spoiler. But Elvin Garcia, he got a $500,000 signing bonus last year, a 154 WRC plus, walked more than he struck out, 16 extra base hits in the Dominican Summer League, 12 for 13 stolen base attempts. Like, those are numbers that, he was a 17-year-old kid when he did that in the DSL. It's the Dominican Summer League, but those are all really impressive numbers at that level. So I'm anxious to see just how high these, and like you said, Thomas Sosa, he hits the ball incredibly hard. I just think all the pieces were there. He was just so young, and I think there's a lot to work with him on his game that I think based on his social media, at least, he has been putting in the work this offseason like nobody else. Hopefully it pays off when he's on the field, but Sosa is a hot name among a lot of people outside of Birdland. And I hope one of these guys is going to have a true breakout. Who do I think it is? I don't know, but it is going to be one of these international prospects in this range. He's going to be well within the top 10 by the end of the year.
Yeah. Another thing, a reason why I'm picking Sosa to be that guy is that obviously when Anthony Villa came on, he thinks he's the next Ken Griffey Jr. Great quote. But the fact that Sosa didn't necessarily deserve the promotion to high A from a pure number standpoint, but the fact that they wanted to push him, felt comfortable pushing him at that age up to that level, willing to let him fail again, like just at that degree, that just to me says this is a guy they know that's going to just make him work that much harder and improve that much faster. So that I think is telling. Just the way they handled him is a very good idea for me that he's going to be a guy, or at least they think he has a very good chance to be a guy like that. And Also, want to just talk about Ethan Anderson at number 21, who I have all the way up at number 15. I've loved his bat just from the time they drafted him, and nothing I saw last year or have read about this offseason has changed my mind. I think he's like the best bat. Van Honeycutt obviously higher potential, but I just think like he's got the full package offensively, and he might not stick at catcher. But I even loved the mindset that he came into. Saw an interview with Steve Molesky, uh, no longer with Masson, but I read it on Masson Sports that he doesn't even mind the idea of he could be a guy that plays some corner outfield, some first base, and could be a third catcher at the major leagues. Like he's got the bat, I think, to support that. And I I just think switch hitting guy with that kind of power, just combination of hit tool, on base ability, some power. Love the guy.
Yeah, I don't know that there was a player out of the draft last summer who had a better debut than Anderson. What he did between Delmarva and Aberdeen at the plate. I think that the bat is going to allow him to be successful. I think at the very least he's going to end this season in Bowie. The position is a big question mark, though. And in fairness to Anderson, he was at Virginia for the same stretch as Kyle Teal for a lot of his collegiate career. So he didn't get the reps behind the plate that he would have necessarily gotten otherwise. So that's something that I think the Orioles are going to have to work on with him this year, is making sure he's able to get behind the plate. And it's going to be a challenge because wherever he is, Ryan Stafford will probably be there too. And that's also someone I think you're going to get behind the plate, as we're going to talk about a little bit later on. But there's no question in my mind that Anderson checks enough boxes at the plate to be interesting, even if he doesn't stick behind the plate. Now, going back to the conversation about the outfielders, the international prospects, I have Sanchez a tick ahead of Martinez right now because I think with Martinez, the strikeout concerns are a little bit more pronounced just because of the age. Sanchez is clearly a little bit further ahead in his development. And with Sosa, I agree with you guys. Don't read too much into his struggles at Aberdeen last year. The Orioles like to make these kind of moves where they challenge players with a move up to the next level at a point where you don't really expect it because of their statistics. Sometimes in cases it will work. It worked for Leandro Arias last year after he got to Aberdeen. Sometimes it doesn't work. And in Sosa's case, he had some weaknesses that were exposed at high A, but the power, I think, the very least, is going to show up this year. If he's able to continue to make strides on defense and cut back on the swing and miss, that's going to do wonders for his prospect stock.
I want to go back to Anderson real quick because I'm trying to pull up these numbers here and it's being wonky. I'm going to end up like dropping from the feed if I click too much around. So Ethan Anderson, among his draft class peers last year, which included the likes of Nick Kurtz, Cam Smith, JJ Weatherholt, Ryan Waldschmidt, a lot of great prospects here. Ethan Anderson, in terms of swing and miss, chase rate, 90th percentile EV, and max EV, was one of the top hitters in his class in the small pro sample sizes last year. Ethan Anderson was at near the bottom of that list. It was 12 players, near the bottom of that list in terms of like exit velos, but it's still well above average. And when you consider chase and swing and miss, he doesn't do either of those things. So yeah, Ethan Anderson is going to be a fun, like we talked about on draft night. Like Ethan Anderson is a super high ceiling draft pick here. Yeah, Griffin Farrell was the more boring of the two picks, but an extremely high floor, arguably the best hit tool in the system already. Ethan Anderson, though, with the catching thing, he was behind Kyle Teal, like Zach said. And that's why I almost think there's so many great catching prospects in this organization. Obviously, you have Adley Basayo up at the top. And then you've got Creed Willems, you've got Stafford, we can talk about 10 different catching prospects here in the system. It's like Ethan Anderson was also very young. He's only like 20, early 21 when they drafted him. I think there's a long leeway here for Anderson where, like, if he needs to sit in high A for a little bit longer, although that bat I think is going to push things, but if they need to hold him back a little bit and say, hey, let's really work on the defense here, they have that opportunity at least here because there's so many other good catching prospects in the system. So he's younger, plenty of time here with Ethan Anderson, but I do wonder what it looks like across the full season. Just how much is that bat going to force an issue where they say, yeah, we've got to get you up to like AA. We got to get you up to AAA by the end of the year. We can't wait on this defense. We'll figure out the defense later on.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to comment on the arms, there's only what 3 pitchers in this zone, but I like them all. Like Edgar Portes, just think he's a really well-rounded pitcher who I think there's still some more left in the tank there. Once he gets to Double A Bowie, I think he could kind of take off. Alex Pham, a guy who I could see as almost like a right-handed Keegan Aiken in the major leagues, where he's going to be a one-time through the order guy, give you multiple innings, come and get you out of jams. And Zach Fruit, I think it's going to be a little low for us when all is said and done because I love the arm again, and it's that high leverage reliever floor almost. And if he can just, I mean, he has pure success since he came into the organization, and if he can maybe add a pitch or improve the command, just like any other pitcher, like he could be a guy that's a bottom or mid rotation starter when all is said and done. So I think he's a guy that I think is going to rise up.
Let's Zach Fruit. He's going to get knocked because he's older. He was a COVID senior who transferred a couple times, I believe. He's going to be docked for his age. And yeah, he did most of his production at the high level last year. Kid got a $40,000 signing bonus in the draft and comes out with some of the best stuff plus numbers in the entire organization last year. And coming into the draft, uh, just based on his profile, again, remind people, was getting Mason Miller comps. Not saying at all he's going to become Mason Miller, but that's how electric his stuff is. That's how good this profile is for a ninth, 10th round senior sign. Uh, a guy who you could see very easily, I think, moving quickly next year and potentially working out of a major league bullpen, even if the command doesn't improve. Yet again, another fantastic find with this low cost, kind of out of left field pitching find here for this organization.
And just especially with pitchers, I don't really care about age as much because it's the stuff. It's stuff. It's this day and age, we can develop new pitches for you at any given time. As long as you can command and you got the stuff, I don't care how old you are. We're going to get you up in the majors and we're going to have you be effective for us.
Yeah, and before we move on, I'll talk about Portes because I had Portes 14th on my list. The fastball velocity, as I mentioned earlier, it's generally not that impressive. It's not a Keeler Morphe or a Pat Riley type of fastball, but the pitch has good shape, really good movement, and he's able to pretty consistently ride at 92 to 93 at this point. And given his age and his build, right now he's listed at 6'2", 165 pounds, 22, just turned 22 back in October. I do think there's projection left for him to get the velocity up a little bit more. And that slider is, well, I've said it on a recent episode, I think it's the best breaking ball in the whole farm system. The stuff plus numbers on it are really good. The movement on it is excellent. And he's done so much in the last 2 years, especially to improve the command of that pitch. So what's really left for him at this point, if he's going to develop as a starter, is to improve the changeup. And I have confidence that the Orioles can either work with that or introduce something else, whether it's a cutter, a sweeper, to offset the fact that the changeup maybe isn't going to quite reach the level of his other pitches. But there's a lot with Portes to like.
Right. There was the videos. Last year we saw the video of him working out with Pedro Martinez in the offseason. And then this year I saw the video of Yaki Rivera, and Pedro was talking about the changeup, and he was explaining the changeup characteristics and how to throw it, when to throw it, all this stuff. Preaching the changeup to Yaki Rivera. And then it was Edgar Portes actually DM'd me and was like, "Here you go. Check out this video too." Working out with him again, that was a video where I have to go back and look at the video and see what pitch he was throwing. I don't know if it was a slider or maybe it was that changeup. Maybe it was a changeup clinic that day. And you just see Pedro just stand there and just walk up and down the bullpen, just clapping. Portes clearly did something that pleased Pedro Martinez there. So maybe it was the changeup. I have to go back and look at that video and see what they were working on that day. But Portes, man, he's the most interesting one. We've talked about him a lot this offseason. I've said I think he could get traded. Because I don't know, he's in this weird territory because he was Rule 5 eligible last year, so he's Rule 5 eligible again. They kept him in high A. They didn't promote him to double A. Can he rise quick enough next year to get protected? Or does he get to the point where, yeah, it's better, but we're not going to protect you? we're going to lose you. We've got to trade you type thing. I don't know. It's going to be a really interesting year for Portis, though.
For sure. And quick shout out to Yaki Rivera. 1 pitch, 1 out, spring training game. Get him in there. Underrated relief prospect in this system.
We'll move on now to 31 through 40 on the list. And this is, again, an interesting part of the list because you've got a lot of position players, a lot of middle infielders, especially, who seem like they're poised to take a step forward, but either still don't have a lot of experience in pro ball or have had their careers disrupted by injuries. And then you've got a couple of interesting pitchers here at well. Number 31, Emilio Sanchez, slick fielding shortstop that we just mentioned a moment ago, a young international prospect you just definitely have on your radar this year when he figures to make his stateside debut down in the FCL. At number 32, Joshua Lorenzo. Lorenzo's 2024 season was sidetracked by an early injury, and he never quite got going at the plate, but still shows tremendous raw power. At number 33, Tavian Josenberger. Josenberger earned a promotion to Bowie in August of last year and got off to a hot start there before an injury ended his season. But he has an interesting skill set, including speed, good plate approach, and defensive versatility that make him a possible breakout candidate coming into this year. At number 34, Reed Trimble. He just manages to hang in there because when he is on the field, you can see the raw athleticism come through. The problem is, though, we just haven't seen a lot of him over the last 3 seasons. At number 35, Chase Alsop, Orioles draft pick out of Auburn in last year's draft, and a guy that's already starting to get some love from national outlets and could be a breakout on the pitching side this year. Number 36, Ellis Cuevas. Utility player who can play a couple of different positions and figures to get some looks in center field at Delmarva next year, where his elite speed should be on display. He pairs that with a developing hit tool that took some really good strides in 2024. Number 37, Luis Almeida. Almeida, international signee for the Orioles before the 2023 season. The last 2 years have been sidetracked by injuries, but there's hope that if Almeida can stay healthy in 2025, the bat is going to really develop. At number 38, Edwin Amparo, who takes a nice jump here after a solid 2024, in which he showed good bat-to-ball skills, good pitch recognition, and the ability to play both spots in the middle infield. Number 39, Iber Cartaya, someone who was not on our radar at all this time last year, mostly because of bad numbers in short season ball. Somehow he flipped a switch last year and not only put up a strong run in the FCL, but then was somehow even a little bit better when he got to Delmarva. And at number 40, catcher Ryan Stafford, someone we talked about a moment ago, 2024 draft pick with some versatility and a good hit tool. So this is a really interesting mix of players where you have a younger arm and somebody like Cartaya who could take a big step forward this year. Same with Alsop. And then with the hitters, it feels like some of these guys are either just one more year of experience or one healthy season away from a breakout, or if they don't really do much in 2025, they could drop down this list further or drop off of it entirely. So there's a wide range of outcomes to this group, but I think it's still interesting nonetheless. So I'm curious to get your guys' thoughts.
This to me is when the depth is really starting to show itself, because I'm like, Tavian Josenberger, number 33, that's way too low. But then I'm like, well, who are we going to put him ahead of? Because I like all the guys ahead of him too. So it's really tough. But Josenberger, to me, big time breakout candidate in 2025. He had 350 plate appearances at High A Aberdeen in 2024 and only batted 230. But his 750 OPS was still good enough for a 117 WRC plus. Walked 14% of the time, only struck out 16.3% of the time. ISO was 175. That's pretty good, especially in Aberdeen. I feel like the only problem was his BABIP was 257 for a guy with his speed and from the left-handed side. Like, there's no way his BABIP should be that low. So if you could just normalize that, his numbers are going to look that much better. I think he's going to have a huge season in 2025. Again, Lorenzo, I think, is a huge breakout candidate. Trimble, if he could stay healthy, like, he's a guy that could shoot up this list. Chase also, it's just hard to know what to do with a guy who, you know, high draft pick as far as pitchers go for the Orioles, didn't pitch in professional ball following the draft, but just everything you read about him, it's like his stuff is good, this so good, like all these great things about him. And you just saw what happened with Jackson Ballmeister, who's now like a top 100 prospect after being traded to Tampa Bay, and you can kind of dream on that. Another breakout candidate, Ellis Cuevas, huge power, could play center field. Like I love this part of the list.
Yeah, I think for me, the two guys who really stick out here, I mean, Emilio Sanchez, of course, high priced international free agent shortstop guy. Someone I think there have been a couple of reports already that a bunch of other teams have been calling the Orioles about already. But Joshua Lorenzo was one of, if not the youngest guy in his signing class, and he has some of the best raw power among his peers. And I'm curious to see just how big of that injury impacted him last year. He just could never get the ball rolling last year in the FCL. So hopefully he's been healthy this offseason and he's good to go next year. And we can finally get a better idea of who he is. But I think the two guys that I'm really intrigued by in this section are Cuevas and Edwin Amparo as well. Cuevas, just because the power really started to shine through, and he had 8 home runs last year in his entire career, which was 2 seasons before this in the DSL. He hit 3 home runs. He had 8 last year, struck out just 15% of the time, walked 12% of the time. And my favorite numbers, you can find them here. First year in the DSL, he had a 45% contact rate. Last year, or 2023 in the DSL, that went up to 55% contact rate. Last year, between the FCL and Delmarva, he had a 74.5% contact rate. So contact going up through the roof. Swinging strike rate was like 50% his first year, down to 30% in 2023. Last year, 12.5%. Phenomenal. Those are the numbers right there that I love looking at with these younger kids, because clearly something changed for Ellis Cuevas. And what do you have? Like 450 something foot home run? Insane.
454, I believe.
Just absurd. Amparo, though, for me is, I don't know, I just feel like he gets completely overlooked. And he's 20 years old. He's a switch hitter, shortstop, signed for $650,000 in 2022. So one of the bigger signings in that class, like second or third highest signing bonus. And his first 2 seasons, the overall numbers weren't great. But if you go back and look at his splits, it was like he improved along the way, but it was always like that final month of each year. It was like, okay, he did enough where the regular season wasn't that great, but he ended on a real high note each time. It's like, all right, considering the amount of money the Orioles gave him, considering he's a switch hitting shortstop and still so young, we'll give him another chance, see what he can do the next year. He finally broke out last year a little bit. 79 games between the FCL and low A, 399 on base percentage, couple home runs, 38 stolen bases, 54 walks to 59 strikeouts. He got to Delmarva and had a 139 WRC plus. Small sample size, but still. I'm pretty stoked to watch both of these guys in this section here.
Yeah, I do like Amparo a lot. I think maybe it's just because he doesn't have like that one standout tool. Like you could say Cuevas, huge power or whatever. He's like all well-rounded guy who's going to walk, get on base. Like, is he really that much worse than Leandro Arias as a prospect? I'm not sure. But yeah, I do like Amparo a lot.
Yeah, I think Amparo has just sort of been, as Nick mentioned, the stat lines when you look at him in his first couple of years in pro ball, seasons weren't terrible, but there was also nothing in there that really excited you. And he doesn't have that one loud tool, but he's just also a very well-rounded player who does a lot of things well. And I was very encouraged by the way he played at Delmarva last year. I'm going to go back to Josenberger for a minute because I think Bob hit the nail on the head, which is that I'm conflicted about him, and then I think he belongs higher on this list. But I only had him at 30, and there are a lot of players that have cases to be higher and that are ranked higher on our list. Yet I think Josenberger, for reasons that I got into on an episode a couple of weeks ago, is one of the best breakout candidates in the farm system this year. The thing that I like about him is that he's already pulling the ball in the air. And if he could just get the line drive rate up, which he managed to do over a small sample size of Bowie, climbing from 19.9% to 25% in those 7 games that he had before the injury. If the line drive rate comes up a little bit, I could see a season with a home run total in the low double digits, 40 to 50 steals easily with his speed, which doesn't get talked about enough because he's in the same farm system and usually on the same team as Enrique Bradfield Jr. And an on base percentage pushing 360, 365, the low strikeout rate. That's going to get you a lot of love on prospects list because the floor is so high and he can play second base and he can play all 3 outfield positions. There's a lot of things he can do that you can see where if he just can stay healthy and put it all together, you have a very solid high floor utility player going into the future.
Yep. Roommates as well with Enrique Bradfield Jr. last year. Like this, the speed is legit. 50 for 56 in stolen base attempts. He had no power when he was at Kansas. Goes to Arkansas, becomes their leadoff hitter, starts raking. Last year, first full year in pro ball, gets 9 home runs at the high level. I almost wonder if also swing and miss, like it does not exist with him. He has Enrique Bradfield Jr. levels of contact and swing and miss as well. I almost wonder with Josenberger, like, is he too patient? He walks a ton and he does not strike out. He does not swing and miss. But I'm almost like, maybe next year we see that strikeout rate bump, but the Orioles get him to be more aggressive, go after pitches earlier in the count, try to tap into more of that damage, and let's see what that results look like at Bowie next year. But yeah, I've always had that thought in the back of my mind. I don't think we talked about that or I've written that or anything, but yeah, I almost wonder if that could be a case with Josenberger.
Before we move on, I do want to talk about Cartaya for a moment because I don't know that there was a pitcher who and there were a lot of pitchers who broke out in big ways this year, but I find his story particularly interesting because his numbers in short season ball for a couple of years going into last year were really, really bad. And then as I talked about it when I was introducing this part of the list, all of a sudden the switch flipped. He was good in the FCL. He got a promotion to Delmarva that came as a little bit of surprise, and he pitched really well there. And Nick, I know that you had a series of tweets and you've written about him at Substack a few times. Give us a little bit more background on what makes him so intriguing despite the early struggles in his career.
It was multiple years of just the numbers were so bad. And that's why we had no clue who he was. Like, didn't seem like, even if you dig deep into the numbers that we have access to, like, it just didn't seem like anything was there. But he's 6'5", 21 years old, and 20 years old last year. And the walk rate was still extremely high. But when the strikeout rates jumped from 23% to 32%, it just, and when you watch him pitch, you could clearly see that when he got to Delmarva, this was a guy with like legitimate stuff who clearly had a plan in place. That's something I think you can tell at the lower level between different guys who are just up there throwing the ball, just chucking it just to chuck it, and guys who have a plan and you can see them attacking hitters in different ways. Cartaya's got a deep pitch mix, and you could see he was throwing all of them in those first couple of outings. It's just something about Cartaya there. I don't know what it was that flipped, but man, those numbers were such an improvement. And when he got to Delmarva, the numbers were even better. So I don't know. And again, he has some fans within the organization. Like, he has some big time fans. And I think that also speaks to his potential down here. He's 6'5", he's listed at 165. I hope he's heavier than that at this point. But I think this is a guy who, yeah, you talk about age not mattering with pitchers. He might be 21 years old and probably starts here back in Delmarva, but because he was so raw last year, if you can work on that, work on adding bulk to that frame, add a little bit more velo, because he's so tall and skinny, you feel like there's a lot more in the tank here with Cartaya. And the delivery just seemed like, again, I'm not a pitching expert, but the delivery just seemed like a bit of just not disconjointed, I guess, just not put together well. Yet, if you clean all that up, see what kind of breakout he has this year.
Yeah, I do like Cartaya. And my last thing is just Ryan Stafford. I feel like the type of hitter he is reminds me of Connor Norby when he was first drafted. Obviously, a little bit lower caliber taken later in the draft. But I feel like if he could add the pop that Norby was able to add once he got into the system, he could be a guy that kind of moves up the list. If he could be a Connor Norby type of bat that can play catcher in a pinch, I mean, that is certainly nothing to sneeze at.
Absolutely. And we'll head for the home stretch here with 41 through 50 on the list. And this is a continuation of a big theme of this episode, which is that there's a lot of pitchers and some pitchers with really good fastballs, some pitchers with really good command. There's just an interesting mix of players here. Starting at number 41 with Levi Wells. Wells got off to a slow start at Aberdeen last year and then missed sometimes an injury, but after returning from the IL, showcased better results and could be poised for a better 2025. At number 42, Esteban Mejia, while he might not have had the breakout that Killer Morphe had last year, he still rose up the ranks with an impressive 2024 season. At number 43, Braxton Bragg. Statistically, Bragg was arguably the best pitcher in the entire farm system over the second half of last season and showcased plus command in his full season debut at Delmarva. Number 44, left-hander Juan Rojas, part of the Jorge Lopez trade back in 2022. Rojas has struggled to stay on the mound because of injuries, but when he has been there, flashes an interesting three-pitch mix that could make him a potential starter down the line. At number 45, Max Wagner. After a solid debut in 2023, Wagner had an injury-marred and largely inconsistent 2024 season. He's going to hope to rebound this season. Number 46, DJ Layton, a draft pick in the 2024 draft. Up the middle, shortstop out of high school, but has the potential to move around to a couple of different positions, including possibly center field, and enters the farm system with a promising hit tool. At number 47, Peter Van Loon. Van Loon rebounded from a big way that cost him a good chunk of the season by debuting at Bowie in July of last season and putting together a really strong second half. At number 48, Blake Money. Much like Bragg, Money showcased premium command in his full season debut with Delmarva. At number 49, Keegan Gillis. Probably one of the more intriguing relievers in the farm system because of his pitch mix. He figures to head to AAA Norfolk this year. And at number 50, Miguel Rodriguez. Rodriguez has yet to play a full season in the minor leagues, but looked impressive during a cup of coffee with Delmarva late last year. Promising hit tool with power projection and perhaps the ability to stick behind the plate. And we'll probably talk about this a little bit more next week when we have our Best of the Rest show. But there are a few other catchers and, frankly, a lot of other players that we could have had in this number 50 range. But the skill set that Rodriguez has at a young age allows him to get the 50th and final place on our countdown list. So let's dive in here to this last group. Again, a big theme of the night, promising young arms with good fastballs and or at least one pitch in their arsenal that makes them stand out, and some command artists here in Bragg and Money. You're the pitcher. We saw it at just about every level in 2024, and it feels like these guys are possibly setting us up for a sequel in 2025.
I like, you mentioned Braxton Bragg. I do like Bragg, 24 years old, but got that kind of, sidearm, funky delivery there. It's, mid 90s fastball. He's got 4 or 5 pitches as well. He spent that entire year in Delmarva where across 96 innings, he had a 30% strikeout rate and just a 5% walk rate. Phenomenal numbers there. Obviously, you're going to keep him on a starter track and see what he can do, but I do wonder just how quickly and how far he could rise in this organization out of a bullpen role. And we talked about him on our, put our breakout picks a couple weeks ago, but I'm until he proves me wrong, Levi Wells, I'm going to ride that train just because he, again, some of the better stuff plus in the minor leagues, actually among his age group in the minors, he had the 3rd highest according to Baseball America. And yeah, the ERA was 6.71, but it was a 3.78 FIP or 4.09 FIP, 3.78 xFIP. The fastball, he throws strikes. He throws the fastball for a strike a ton. So he can command the strike zone as well, even though walks were an issue back to his college days. They really weren't so much last year when he returned from his shoulder injury. Again, if the shoulder injury is past him, I think Wells is poised for a big rebound in 2025. I like Bragg. And then you've got the younger, high ceiling guys and someone like Esteban Mejia, who I really enjoy just because he throws 100 miles per hour. But also, he's not just one of these young international arms who throws gas, but he also throws strikes and he doesn't walk a ton of guys. So that's opened my eyes to Mejia. We got to watch him last year in the DSL. He could be this year's Keeler Morphe, maybe not that high of a rise, but in terms of he's the next young, he's only 17 years old right now. He's the next young international pitching prospect that starts to catch on and get a lot more helium as the year progresses. But there's still some arms here. Certainly it's high floor potential bullpen arms, but there are still some guys here who, when people say like, oh, the system doesn't have the depth anymore, blah, 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 they're not doing the research. They're not really looking at these guys in this 41 through 50 range. There are Keegan Gillies could work out of a major league bullpen this year, potentially. Like there are 3 or 4 guys who I think you can make a legitimate case for we see in the major leagues within the next 3 or 4 years.
I agree. And yeah, I was, while you were talking, looking for the stat that I figured out with Braxton Bragg when I did his countdown episode. Something like if you take out like his 5 or 6 blow up outings, like his numbers were just absolutely insanely ridiculous. Wish I had him off the top of my head, but I do have some interesting numbers for Blake Money, who in the first half of 2024, covering 49.2 innings, he had a 4.71 ERA, which was worse than the numbers were worse than he pitched because he had a 3.68 FIP, a solid 27.2% strikeout rate, 6.9% walk rate, 1.29 WHIP, and 243 batting average against. But then in the second half, despite not being promoted to high A Aberdeen, he clearly could have and probably should have been, because in his final 53.1 innings, he had a 1.69 ERA, a 2.19 FIP, so not a fluke. 28.8% strikeout rate went up, walk rate went down to 4.8%, a 0.84 whip, and a 178 batting average against. And whatever numbers I was thinking of for Bragg were probably even better. So it's like these guys were stuck at Delmarva, not necessarily because of performance or that the Orioles didn't think that they couldn't handle high A. It's just like when you have this many pitchers, some guys are going to kind of draw the short straw, so to speak. So yeah, continue to just love the pitchers and the depth at this range. And Esteban Mejia could easily be this year's Keeler Morphe if he just continues to put it all together. Maybe not like exactly like Morphe, the excitement, but just as far as caliber of prospect. Levi Wells could have a huge jump in 2025. He's got the stuff to do so, especially if you want to turn him loose in the bullpen. Yeah, Miguel Rodriguez, I absolutely love this kid. I think he's going to be a guy that's firmly in the top 30 by the end of this year, which if I keep saying that about enough guys, I don't know if there's room for all these jumps that I'm expecting. But yeah, it's just a fun farm system right now in Baltimore.
Can I also say about Blake Money real quick? Just he's 6'7". And you talk about like the short end of the stick in terms of probably not being able to move up to Aberdeen because of the logjam. But when he was at LSU, he was like one of the LSU's top starters. And then they bring in Paul Skeens and they say, Money, you're in the bullpen. So like he has there. And when the Orioles they drafted Money and Riley Cooper. Riley Cooper was also a reliever who had starter stuff at LSU, but there's no room. You only need 3 starters in college. No room for him in the rotation either. And I think there were some notes after that draft that the Orioles saw starter traits in both of those arms. But with Money, even like 6'7", and he gets up to like 96 miles per hour. At least that's what I have here, is what his max was last year. I don't know if it's higher or not, but 6'7", 96 miles per hour, pounds the strike zone, couple breaking balls in there as well. Like, that's another guy who, yeah, you put him in a bullpen. How high, how quickly does Blake Money climb next year? Super intriguing arm that, I don't think people understood just how good those numbers were last year. Granted, this is an LSU kid, NCAA national champion, pitching in low A, but still, the numbers were so good. I think they reached a point where they mean something still.
Yeah, and to the point you guys both made, We did have a log jam in the farm system last year with pitchers. We saw that play out, and Money and Bragg were not the only pitchers that I think probably got held back because of that. I think Edgar Portes had a strong case to get to Bowie before the end of the season. I thought Zach Fruit had a really strong case to be there, and then you could even go up a level. Alex Pham in a different year probably would have ended the season in Norfolk. I thought Cameron Weston made a really strong case to get at least a cup of coffee with the Tides before the season ended. And ultimately, both of them ended up at Bowie, and Portes, of course, was in Aberdeen all year. I'll go back to Mejia for a moment because him and Keeler Morphe are going to be kind of interesting to track throughout the year. Mejia is younger. He's probably going to start this year in the FCL. I don't know if we'll see him in low A at all, but one thing that does come up a lot when people ask us about Morphe is, of course, listed at 5'8", 161 pounds. That might or might not be generous, depending on who you ask. Mejia, though, fits the mold of projectable starter a lot more than Morphe does. He's listed at 6'3", 175 pounds. He's 17, about to turn 18 in early March. So there's a lot of room there left for him to certainly dial up the fastball velocity even more. I've said before, if you can pitch, I don't care how tall you are or how much you weigh. We talked about Pedro Martinez a little bit ago. That's a Hall of Famer who had far from a prototypical starter's body. But if you like to look at those sort of things, you really should have your eye on Esteban Mejia. And even if you're not into that, you should still have your eye on him because he had a really impressive pro debut last season. I could see him taking a nice step forward this year. And with that, that does it for this look at our top 50 prospects. We will be back next week with a couple of episodes, including one that looks at the best of the rest. This is a follow-up we do every year when we look at the players who got consideration and made at least one of our individual top 50 lists, but fell short of the ultimate top 50. And sometimes we'll talk about players who end up well inside the list by the end of the year. So you're not going to want to miss that. We'll also have the latest coverage from spring training next week. In the meantime, you can check us out on our many social media channels. We're over at Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, X, Blue Sky, Twitch. We're also on TikTok and over at Substack, OriolesOnTheVerge.substack.com. And we're going to have a couple of pieces related to the top 50 dropping this week. Nick has prepared reports for all 50 players inside of our list. That will be posted this week. And then I'm going to have a feature later on in the week that looks at how the 2025 edition of our preseason top 50 differs from some lists we've done in the past. So you're not going to want to miss that. In the meantime, as you're browsing around the internet, be sure to head over to Patreon and check out our Patreon community. Become a member today. Patreon members had access to this countdown early in the form of daily episodes. And throughout the regular season, we will be delivering bonus coverage to our patrons. You can sign up at the $3, $5, or $10 levels to have access to that today. For Bob Phelan and Nick Stevens, this is Zach Spedden. You've been listening to Orioles on the Verge, presented by BetOnline and part of the Believe Podcast Network.